My name is Cassidy Moore. I'm 32 years old, an interior architect living in Seattle. 3 years ago, my life shattered in a single evening because my sister stole the man I was supposed to marry. I still remember the way the air smelled that night: lavender from the garden, grilled peaches from the kitchen, wine breathing on the sideboard. It was the eve of my engagement party. My parents' home in Oregon glowed with string lights and family chatter, and I was floating through the chaos with a sense of something almost sacred. It was my moment, our moment. Trevor and I had been together for 4 steady, thoughtful years. He was kind, measured, gentle, in the way that made me believe I was safe with him. Then came the fracture. I'd stepped inside to grab a shawl. The hallway was dim. The house had gone quiet in that soft lull that comes before sunset. That's when I heard them. Two voices, low, too close, one laugh, breathless. I turned toward the den, barefoot on hardwood, unsure why my stomach twisted so violently. There they were, my fiancé, Trevor, and my sister, Clara. His hand rested on her waist. Her fingers grazed the back of his neck. They were whispering something I couldn't hear, but their faces were just inches apart, so familiar, so charged, that it sucked the breath out of me. They didn't notice me at first. I just stood there, frozen, watching them lean into each other, like I hadn't existed, like I hadn't been the one building a life with him, like I hadn't trusted them both. When they finally saw me, neither said a word. The room was still, no yelling, no apology, just silence, and the sound of something inside me collapsing. That was the night everything changed. If you had asked me then, on that porch, my hand trembling, a garden full of laughing guests behind me, if I believed I'd ever feel whole again, I would have said no. But here I am, 3 years later. When I walked into that family dinner with the man I actually married and saw Clara freeze at the sight of him, that's when I knew some things don't need to be said out loud to be heard. A week before the engagement party, life felt almost cinematic. I had flown down from Seattle to my parents' house in Eugene, Oregon. The home I grew up in, the creaky front porch, the ivy curling along the gutters, the sound of my mother humming as she cooked, wrapped around me like an old quilt. It wasn't perfect, but it was familiar warm. Clara was already there, of course. She always managed to arrive early, uninvited or not, and insert herself into the middle of things. My younger sister was the type who could steal attention without trying. Radiant, quick-witted, the kind of person you noticed even when you didn't want to. Growing up, people always said we were opposites. I was quiet and thoughtful. She was loud and electric. I used to think that made us balance each other out. I don't believe that anymore. In those early days, Clara was surprisingly helpful. She talked with the florist, texted me color palettes, even ran to pick up Trevor's favorite whiskey. I remember telling my mom, "It's nice having her here." My mom, smiling too quickly, said, "She's just excited for you." At the time, I wanted to believe that. There were moments, though, subtle, strange ones. The way Clara's hand lingered on Trevor's arm when she left. The inside jokes I wasn't part of. The glance he gave her across the dinner table that made my skin prickle. I caught it all, those microscopic betrayals, but I swallowed them down, convincing myself I was being paranoid. Clara had always been flirtatious. Trevor was just comfortable with my family. That's what love is, right? Trusting even when your gut begs you not to. The night of the party came quickly. Friends and relatives poured into our backyard, sipping wine beneath the apple trees, music echoing from the Bluetooth speaker Clara insisted we use. I wore a pale green dress Trevor once said brought out my eyes. He looked handsome, even nervous, like this meant something real to him. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. Midway through the night, while helping my mom arrange extra dessert plates, I realized I had left my shawl inside. The temperature had dropped just enough to raise goosebumps on my arms, so I ducked back through the kitchen and into the quiet hallway. That's when I heard the low voices, a murmur, a breathy laugh, Clara's laugh. I turned toward the den, and there it was, them. Trevor standing too close, Clara's hands in his hair, their bodies leaning in like magnets pulled from opposite poles. Time didn't slow down. It stopped. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was watching something I had no language for, a private world unfolding that I was never meant to witness. They didn't see me right away. In those seconds of invisibility, I felt everything. Every lie, every dismissal, every silent warning I had ignored fall into place like a cruel, perfect puzzle. When Trevor finally turned and saw me, his face twisted into something between guilt and dread. Clara just blinked. There was no gasp, no apology, only silence. I backed away slowly. My footsteps didn't echo. Even the floorboards seemed to pity me. Outside, the party continued. Laughter, music, champagne flutes clinking. No one knew I had just lost my future. I didn't stay for goodbyes. I packed my things before dawn, left a note on the kitchen counter that simply read, "I need time," and slipped out into the gray morning without waking a soul. Back in Seattle, my apartment looked different, smaller, somehow lonelier. The walls echoed in a way they hadn't before. I took down the engagement photos, stuffed them into a shoebox, and buried it beneath winter coats in the closet. I deleted every saved message, blocked Trevor's number, muted Clara's name wherever it appeared. But there were things I couldn't erase, like the smell of his shampoo still lingering on a sweatshirt or the sound of Clara's laughter, now sharper than glass in my memory. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not my coworkers, not the barista who'd memorized my name and order. I simply poured myself into work. Long days at the architecture firm, late nights redrafting renderings no one asked for. Exhaustion became a shield. If I was tired enough, I wouldn't have to think, wouldn't have to feel. Weeks passed, then months. One Friday night, nearly 6 months after it all fell apart, I received an invitation to a gallery opening downtown, a local artist I vaguely remembered from an old college connection. I almost didn't go, but something in me, stubbornness, maybe pride, refused to let my life shrink any smaller. That's where I saw him again, Damien Carter. He was taller than I remembered, with a quiet elegance in the way he stood, hands in pockets, shoulders relaxed like nothing could rattle him. He had been at my engagement party once, an old friend of Trevor's from grad school. Clara used to talk about him in passing, always with that performative admiration she saved for men she wanted but couldn't quite impress. He recognized me before I could disappear into a corner. "Cassidy Moore," he said, smiling as he stepped closer. "I almost didn't believe it was you." Neither did I. I felt awkward, like I had just stepped into the skin of someone I no longer fully fit. "It's been a long time," I managed. We talked about art, about the city, about how absurd the wine selection was. He asked nothing about the past, not about Trevor, not about Clara. Just asked what I'd been working on, what coffee shop I liked most, whether I still sketched designs by hand or had fully converted to digital. He made space without demanding it. That night, I went home lighter than I had in months. It didn't become a whirlwind romance. It became something quieter, slower. We ran into each other again the following week, then again at a park on a rainy Sunday. Before I realized it, the world I'd been tiptoeing through had shifted. With Damien, I didn't feel like a woman trying to hide her wounds. I felt like someone rediscovering how to live. He listened, not to respond, not to analyze, but to truly hear. He'd glance at me across a table and somehow know when I needed silence and when I needed distraction. He never filled the air with empty noise. Over time, I started to tell him the truth. Not all of it, not at once, but in small offerings, a flicker of pain here, a mention of Clara there. He never pushed for more. He just held space when I unraveled. There were nights we stayed up late in my apartment, drinking tea, listening to old jazz records. Nights I cried quietly into his shirt without needing to explain why. And mornings I'd wake up to find he had made coffee just the way I liked it, with oat milk and the tiniest pinch of cinnamon. In all of this, I discovered something unexpected. Joy. Not loud joy, not the kind you post about, but the kind that nestles deep in your bones and says, "You're safe now." I didn't tell my family. I didn't reach out. When Damien and I eventually decided to marry, just the two of us, a courthouse, 2 witnesses we met that morning, I knew I wasn't hiding. I was protecting something sacred, something they no longer had the right to touch. We didn't wear white. There were no flowers, no aisle, no officiant reciting recycled vows, Just me, Damien, a quiet judge named Marcus, and two elderly witnesses who smiled like they'd been waiting for someone to ask them to believe in love again. It was raining that morning, Seattle's kind of rain, soft and moody. I remember looking at Damien as we stood before the judge, thinking how strange it was that something this small, this quiet, could carry so much weight. There were no gasps, no drama, no family on either side, just two people choosing each other. Afterward, we walked to a bakery down the block and split a croissant, still warm, flaky crumbs landing on his tie. We laughed, not because it was perfect, but because it was real ours. Damien never asked me to announce it, never pushed me to tell my parents or Clara or Trevor. He understood that some things didn't need to be broadcast to be true. Our life together became its own universe, gentle, intentional, and mercifully separate from the one I'd left behind. 2 years passed like that, steady. Our home was a converted loft with exposed brick and plants that somehow stayed alive despite my history of neglecting green things. Damien filled the walls with art. I filled the shelves with design books. We hosted dinners for friends who didn't care who I used to be. We took road trips without posting about them. We created something unshakably ours. I was happy, genuinely, deeply. When the call came from my grandfather, I almost didn't answer. His voice was softer than I remembered, friendlier. Cass, he said, still using the nickname only he had ever earned the right to use. I'm turning 80 next month. I want one dinner, just the family, one night. I hesitated. He was the only one who had called on birthdays after I vanished, the only one who sent a handwritten card on our first wedding anniversary, even though no one had told him. Somehow he knew. Somehow he always knew. So I said, yes. Damien watched me as I hung up, concern barely veiled behind his quiet eyes. You don't have to go, he said gently, his hand finding mine. I know, I replied, squeezing his fingers. But I think I want to for him, not for them. We agreed we'd go together, that I wouldn't face it alone. Not again. The drive down to Eugene felt longer than usual. The farther south we went, the heavier the air felt. Memories clung to familiar exits and highway signs. By the time we pulled into my parents' driveway, the light was already turning gold. Everything looked the same. The old wind chime still sang near the porch swing. The flower beds were overgrown but thriving. The front door creaked the same way it always had. For a moment, I was 29 again, bruised, breathless, trying to find air after watching my life come apart inside these very walls. But Damien's hand at the small of my back reminded me I wasn't that woman anymore. Inside, I helped set the table with my mother, silent, polite. She commented on how good I looked, how surprised she was to see me, but didn't ask much more. My father nodded once and returned to checking on the roast. It was as if my absence had been folded into the fabric of the family and quietly sewn shut. I was laying out the silverware when I heard them. Two voices, familiar, too familiar, Clara and Trevor. I didn't turn around, not yet. Instead, I let them come to me. Their footsteps came first, sharp heels and the low thud of dress shoes. I didn't have to look to know it was Clara and Trevor. That sound had always meant the same thing. She was in control, and he was 2 steps behind, like a shadow she wore for convenience. When they stepped into the dining room, I kept my posture steady, spine straight as I set the last fork on the linen napkin. Then I turned. Clara paused mid-step. Trevor looked worn, not tired, but faded, like someone had drained the color out of him. Clara recovered first, because of course she did. Well, she said, flashing that signature smirk, look who finally decided to show up. Crawled out of your little Seattle cave, huh, Cass? I didn't blink. Nice to see you too, Clara. Her eyes traveled quickly to my left hand, then back up, curiosity masked as condescension. Still playing the lone wolf, I see, she said sweetly, just loud enough for the room to hear. I tilted my head slightly. Actually, no. I'm married. The air shifted. Even the sound of silverware being placed on the table stopped. My mother looked up from arranging salad bowls. My father paused by the wine decanter. Clara's expression faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. Trevor's brow furrowed. My husband's on his way, I added, smoothing the hem of the tablecloth. He should be here any minute. As if on cue, The front door creaked open. Footsteps, a coat being set on the rack, and then he entered, Damien. He wore a tailored navy coat, dark trousers, and that quiet authority that didn't require announcement. His eyes found mine immediately, warm and unwavering. He smiled small, just for me, and crossed the room like he belonged in it. "Sorry I'm late," he murmured, kissing my temple as his arm circled my waist. Traffic was a mess. I looked over his shoulder in time to catch Clara's mouth slightly open. Trevor, meanwhile, had gone absolutely still. We took our seats. Damien sat beside me, his hand resting lightly against mine on the table. The dinner began like any other. Salad first, then roasted chicken with rosemary, and rolls that my grandfather insisted came from the same bakery since 1982. My mother asked Damien polite questions. His work, his family, where we live now. My father mostly nodded, chiming in when the conversation dipped. But Clara said nothing. She didn't eat much either, pushed food around on her plate like a child stalling bedtime. Trevor barely looked up. The tension wasn't loud. It simmered in the way Clara's shoulders never quite relaxed, in the way she kept glancing between me and Damien as though trying to locate a crack. There wasn't one. After the main course, my grandfather stood with his wine glass lifted, his voice a little trembly, but full of grace. "To family," he said, "to forgiveness if we're brave enough, and to the hope that even old roots can bloom again." We raised our glasses. I met his eyes. He winked. Then Clara stood, tapped her spoon against her glass, that performative little clinkling she always did when the attention shifted from her for too long. "I'd like to say a few words," she announced, "about my dear sister Cassidy." My stomach nodded, but I didn't look away. "It's quite something, really," she began, her voice syrupy. "Disappearing for years and then showing up with a husband no one's ever met. Bold, I'll give you that." I said nothing. Neither did Damien. "Some of us believe in transparency," Clara continued, "but I suppose others prefer to live in secrecy." Her gaze narrowed, challenging. Then Trevor's chair scraped against the floor. "That's enough, Clara," he said quietly but firmly. Clara turned toward him, stunned. "Excuse me." Trevor shook his head. "You don't have to do this." "Do what?" she snapped. "Call out the fact that she showed up out of nowhere acting." I said enough. His voice cut through her sentence like glass. They stared at each other. Whatever had once been between them wasn't there now. Only weight and regret. Clara scoffed, grabbed her wine glass, and stormed out the patio doors into the garden. Trevor followed, his expression hollow. They didn't come back. I took a sip of wine and let myself breathe. The night ended quietly. Damien helped my grandfather back to his armchair while I gathered plates from the table. My mother gave me a long, unreadable look before offering a half-hearted hug. My father muttered something about the weather. No one mentioned Clara again. As we stepped outside, the air had turned crisp, laced with the scent of garden soil and leftover lemon pie. The porch light cast a soft glow across the driveway. Damien slipped his hand into mine. "You okay?" he asked. I looked up at the house. So familiar, so distant now. Then at him. I said. "For the first time in a long time, I really am." We walked back to the car in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't ache but heals. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. Clara and Trevor were part of my past, but they didn't own my future. I wasn't there to make them feel small. I was there to remind myself how far I'd come. As Damien started the engine, his fingers brushing mine once more, I knew this wasn't revenge. This was freedom.